Separation of church and state has become one of the best known phrases in American history, and it's a phrase that's been completely turned on its head from what its original intent was. When you look at separation of church and state, that was not a phrase that came from secularists trying to keep Christians out of the public arena. It was a phrase that came out of the Reformation trying to keep the government out of the church.
Now, you said some pretty interesting thing that I've never heard before, that the Reformation, okay, that period of time was really based upon that issue. We always thought that Protestantism was coming away from Catholicism, and that created the Protestant church, but you're saying that really the Reformation was really to get the affairs of the state out of the affairs of the church.
Exactly. The Reformation was not a Catholic Protestant thing at all, because the Reformation was saying, hey, wait a minute, we're doing these practices, here's what the Bible teaches, let's go back to what the Bible teaches.
Got it.
Now, eventually, after 2 centuries of that, the Protestant church was birthed, but that was never the design, that was never the intent.
Wow.
These guys were loyal Catholic priests who were just saying, we need to go back to the Bible. Now, you had Henry VIII who birthed the Protestant of the Anglican church because he wanted to be in charge of something, so he wanted his own church to be in charge of, so he birthed it. And then you had Anglicans saying, wait a minute, we're not doing this right, here's what the Bible teaches. And it's the Bible that teaches separation of church and state, but it's an institutional separation, not an influential separation.
Got it.
You see, the first time you find the phrase is in England in the 1500s with a theologian, Richard Hooker, and he's the one who first used the phrase separation of church and state. Then as you come into American history, you find the first use of the phrase separation of church and state is by the minister, Christian minister, Roger Williams. It's the same thing. He's trying to get the government to leave the church alone.
We so often hear the Constitution's religion clauses in the First Amendment coupled with the phrase separation of church and state. Yet concerning religion, the First Amendment only states, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Clearly, neither the word separation, nor church, nor state is found in any part of the First Amendment. In fact, that phrase appears in no governmental founding document. Of course, most today recognize the phrase separation of church and state, but few know its source. Yet it is important to understand the origins of that phrase and how it subsequently became somehow attached to the First Amendment. The debates surrounding the framing of the First Amendment ran from June the 7th through September the 25th of 1789, and the records of those debates make unequivocally clear that the First Amendment's purpose was to limit the federal government in 2 specific areas. First, the federal government was prohibited from establishing a national denomination, whether Catholic, Anglican, or any other. This was the very problem that America had faced when she was part of Great Britain. The founders did not want that in America. The part of the First Amendment that forbids any such national denomination is called the Establishment Clause, and it is the part stating, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Secondly, the First Amendment also prohibited the federal government from interfering with or limiting the people's religious expressions. This part of the First Amendment is called the Free Exercise Clause. It's the part stating, or prohibiting, the free exercise thereof.
So what is the source of Jefferson's now infamous phrase? On November the 7th, 1801, the Baptists of Danbury, Connecticut wrote Jefferson concerned that the guarantee of the free exercise of religion appeared in the First Amendment. To them, this suggested that the right to religious exercise was a government-granted rather than a God-granted right, thus implying that someday the government might try to regulate religious expression. They believed that freedom of religion was a God-granted, unalienable right, and that the government should be powerless to restrict religious activities unless, as the Baptists explained, those activities cause someone to, quote, work ill to his neighbor.
Jefferson understood their concern, for he had already proven that it was his concern as well. He replied to the Danbury Baptists on January the 1st, 1802, thanking them for their kind prayers and assuring them that their free exercise of religion was indeed an inalienable right and therefore would not be meddled with by the government. Jefferson pointed out to them that there was, quote, a wall of separation between church and state, and that this wall of separation would prevent the government from interfering with or hindering religious activities.
In modern politics, opposite. How then has our history been redefined and rewritten? Discover our nation's godly history in the American Heritage series. America, this is your heritage.
Modern day now, we believe separation in church and state is to keep the church under control,
Right.
you know, and so that the state, you know, and state affairs, you cannot have religious activities into the affairs of state and school and that kind of stuff. So you're talking about a 180
A complete
degree
reversal.
difference.
See, what's happened today is separation church and state has become the great club of secularism to beat people of faith back in the corner. Oh, you're trying to pray. Get back in the corner. Separation church. So it's used to stop religious expressions. It was,
That's certainly, Dave, how I understand it.
and that's the way it has been in the last 50 years.
Okay.
What it had been for the first 450 years was to get the government to leave religious expression alone. It's not their business to regulate religious expression. It's not their business to tell you how, when, or where you can pray, or what you can say when you do pray. It's not their business to tell you what religious beliefs you're going to have. That was separation of church and state. The way that phrase came about was a group of Baptist ministers wrote to Thomas Jefferson, who was president. And Jefferson was a sympathetic ear. I mean, he agreed with them totally. And they said, look, we as Baptists have been the subjects of persecution in America because we were preaching without an Anglican license, and they're not supposed to be doing that. I mean, that's not separate. We want separation of church and state. We want the government to leave us alone, stay out of what we do. And so they wrote to Jefferson with that concern. They said, we're really concerned about this First Amendment to the Constitution. I mean, this First Amendment says that Congress can't make any law respecting the establishment of religion. There shouldn't be anything in the Constitution saying what government can or can't do with religion because it's not their domain.
Right.
So their concern is that having government mentioned in the First Amendment, the government someday might think that it had the right to regulate religious expression. You know, we would say, hey, First Amendment's a protection for us. They were saying, no, First Amendment opens the door for government to come get involved with religious activities, and the First Amendment's a problem. That was their view. So Jefferson writes them back. He said, look, you don't have to worry. He just assured them the government's not going to stop their religious activities because we have a wall of separation. Now, that's really key because his whole wall of separation is to reassure them that the government's not going to mess with any of their religious activities. You're not going to have to worry about the government stopping religious expression. It's not going to do it. See, that was the design.
Yeah.
Now we use separation of church and state to stop religious expression.
In fact, for almost a century and a half after Jefferson's letter, there was no misunderstanding either about the purpose of the First Amendment or the meaning of Jefferson's phrase. Here's an example. In 1853, half a century after Jefferson had written that phrase, a group petitioned Congress urging them to separate Christian principles from government, with chaplains being turned out of Congress and the military, and Christian principles being removed from government in the official public square. They desired a so-called separation of church and state, but in the wrong direction. That is, instead of the government protecting religious expressions in the public arena because of separation, they wanted the government to remove religious expressions. Congress spent a year investigating that possibility and then emphatically rejected it, declaring,
Had the people, the Founding Fathers, during the Revolution had any suspicion of any attempt to war against Christianity, that revolution would have been strangled in its cradle. At the time of the adoption of the Constitution and its amendments, the universal sentiment was that Christianity should be encouraged, but not any one sect, denomination. The report continued. It said, in this age, there is no substitute for Christianity. That was the religion of the founders of the Republic, and they expected it to remain the religion of their descendants. 2 months later, the Judiciary Committee made this strong declaration. It said, the great, vital, and conservative element in our system, the thing that holds our system together, is the belief of our people in the pure doctrines and the divine truths of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
that was Congress. Congress clearly refused to separate Christian principles from the public arena. However, it was not just Congress that refused to do so. The Supreme Court refused to do so as well. In an 1878 case, more than 3/4 of a century after Jefferson had penned his separation letter, the plaintiffs in that case invoked his separation of church and state phrase, hoping to use it to their advantage. However, that Supreme Court was not content to let them get by with just using the 8-word separation phrase out of context from Jefferson's letter, which, by the way, is what courts today do. No, rather than just cite the single phrase, the Supreme Court reprinted a lengthy segment from Jefferson's letter to prove the separation of church and state was intended to protect rather than remove Christian values and practices from public policy.